In the shadows of the 17th century, as medieval guilds gave way to the first stirrings of Enlightenment thought, a brotherhood was forming whose influence would echo through centuries to come. Their symbols, the square and compass, the all-seeing eye, the letter G would one day adorn buildings across continents, inspire countless conspiracy theories, and become embedded in the very fabric of nations. As you settle in, dear dreamer, let us travel back to where it all began, to understand the mysterious origins of perhaps the most famous secret society in history, the Freemasons. The story begins not with kings or conquerors, but with humble craftsmen stonemasons who built the great cathedrals of Europe, their hands calloused from carving magnificent arches and spires that reached toward heaven. These were men who understood the sacred geometry of architecture, who passed down closely guarded techniques from master to apprentice, who formed guilds to protect their knowledge and ensure fair treatment. In their lodges, temporary workshops established near construction sites, they would gather not just to work, but to share meals, resolve disputes, and maintain the standards of their ancient craft. As cathedral building waned in the late medieval period, these lodges began accepting men who were not stonemasons by trade, accepted, or speculative masons, who were drawn to the brotherhood's principles and symbolism rather than its practical craft. Wealthy merchants, philosophers, and gentlemen began to join, bringing new intellectual dimensions to the old traditions. The tools of masonry level, the plumb line, the trowel were gradually transformed into metaphors for moral and spiritual development. The pivotal moment came on a summer's day in 1717, when 4 London lodges gathered at the Goose and Gridiron Ale House in St. Paul's Churchyard to form what would become known as the First Grand Lodge. From this humble beginning in a tavern near the shadow of St. Paul's Cathedral, modern Freemasonry would spread across continents and centuries, carried by merchants, military officers, and colonists to the far corners of the globe. The organization that emerged was neither entirely public nor entirely secret. Their existence was known, their meeting places often prominent buildings in town centers, yet their rituals, passwords, and handshakes remained closely guarded. This duality, visible yet mysterious, would prove fertile ground for both admiration and suspicion in the centuries to come. The Masonic philosophy centered around a deceptively simple idea: the improvement of mankind through moral education and brotherhood. They embraced enlightenment, values, reason, science, tolerance, and the belief in a supreme being they called the Grand Architect of the universe. Their temples became sanctuaries where men of different religions and social classes could meet on the level, as equals, united by shared virtues, rather than divided by sectarian differences. As Masonry spread throughout the 18th century, its membership came to include some of the most influential men of the age. Voltaire was initiated in Paris in 1778. Mozart, whose opera The Magic Flute contains thinly veiled Masonic symbolism, joined a Vienna lodge in 1784. In America, Benjamin Franklin became a Mason in Philadelphia, while George Washington took his oath on a Masonic Bible. These connections fueled whispers that the Brotherhood was secretly guiding world events, pulling unseen strings from behind ornate lodge doors. The French Revolution marked the first great crisis for the Brotherhood. Though many revolutionaries were Masons, the Brotherhood itself became a target of suspicion. In 1798, a Scottish scientist named John Robison published Proofs of a Conspiracy, claiming that the Illuminati, short-lived Bavarian group with some similarities to Freemasonry, had infiltrated Masonic lodges with the goal of overthrowing all monarchies and religions. This conspiracy theory, though unfounded, would never quite disappear from the public imagination. More concrete opposition came from religious authorities, particularly the Catholic Church. In 1738, Pope Clement XII issued the first papal bull against Freemasonry, forbidding Catholics from joining under penalty of excommunication. The Church's objections were manifold: the secretive nature of the Brotherhood, its religious inclusiveness at a time of sectarian division, and perhaps most significantly, the fear that it represented a rival authority and value system outside ecclesiastical control. Yet despite opposition, or perhaps because of it, Masonry continued to thrive through the 19th century. Lodge buildings rose in cities and towns across Europe and America, often among the most architecturally impressive structures in their communities. Their charitable works expanded, establishing orphanages, building hospitals, providing for widows and the elderly. The Scottish Rite and York Rite developed elaborate systems of higher degrees beyond the basic three of entered apprentice, fellowcraft, and master mason. Within these degrees lay the heart of Masonic teaching, a system of moral instruction conveyed through ritual, symbol, and allegory. Central to this was the legend of Hiram Abiff, the master architect of Solomon's Temple, who, according to Masonic tradition, was murdered by 3 ruffians when he refused to divulge the secret passwords of a master mason. Through a ritual reenactment of Hiram's death and symbolic resurrection, initiates were taught lessons about fidelity, integrity, and the immortality of the soul. The 20th century brought new challenges to the ancient brotherhood. Membership peaked in the years following World War II, when joining fraternal organizations was part of mainstream American life. But the cultural shifts of the 1960s and beyond saw younger generations less interested in the formality and tradition represented by Masonic ritual. Membership numbers began a slow decline that continues to this day. More ominous was the Brotherhood's experience under totalitarian regimes. Both fascists and communists viewed Freemasonry as a threat. Hitler believed the organization was part of a Jewish conspiracy and sent many German Masons to concentration camps. Under Franco, Mussolini, and Stalin, Masonic lodges were forcibly closed and members persecuted. The very values that define Masonry, tolerance, freedom of thought, cosmopolitanism, made it inherently incompatible with the demands of authoritarian rule. Today, as we drift toward sleep, Freemasonry continues its quiet existence, neither as powerful as its detractors fear, nor as influential as its peak years. Its temples still stand in towns and cities around the world, though some have been sold as membership dwindles. Its rituals still unfold behind closed doors, largely unchanged over centuries. Its members still wear aprons reminiscent of the stonemasons of old, still use archaic language in their ceremonies, still pledge themselves to ideals of brotherly love, relief, and truth. Perhaps what remains most remarkable about the Freemasons is not their supposed secrets or hidden influence, but their longevity. In a world of constant change and disruption, here is an institution that has maintained its essential character for over 300 years. The same symbols that adorned 18th century lodges still hang on the walls today. The same moral lessons that instructed men of the Enlightenment continue to be passed down to new generations. As your consciousness begins to drift toward the borders of sleep, consider that perhaps the true secret of Freemasonry lies not in hidden conspiracies or esoteric knowledge, but in something more fundamental: the timeless human desire for meaning, brotherhood, and moral improvement. In a world that can often seem chaotic and divided, the Masonic Lodge remains a place where men still gather to reflect on ancient virtues, to form bonds across social divides, and to seek, through symbol and ritual, a connection to something larger than themselves. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and perhaps in your dreams, you might glimpse the luminous symbols of this centuries-old brotherhood, the square and compass, the columns of wisdom, strength, and beauty, the eternal search for light amidst darkness. For in that search, we find not just the story of Freemasonry, but a reflection of humanity's own quest for meaning and connection across the shifting sands of time. Deep within the Bavarian state of Germany, on a fateful May evening in 1776, 5 men gathered in a candlelit room to establish a society that would cast shadows far longer than its brief existence. Their vision, radical for its time, was to use reason and education to combat superstition, religious influence over public life, and abuses of state power. Though they could not have known it, the name they chose for their organization would one day become synonymous with conspiracy theories and hidden powers, the Order of the Illuminati. As you settle beneath your covers, dear dreamer, let us venture back to the Age of Enlightenment to uncover the true story behind one of history's most misunderstood secret societies. The founder of this clandestine brotherhood was a charismatic law professor named Adam Weishaupt, who had been educated by Jesuits but had grown disillusioned with their influence. Inspired by Enlightenment ideals and the writings of philosophers like Rousseau, Weishaupt envisioned an organization that would spread rational thinking, liberal ideas, and secular values through a carefully structured system of education and mutual support. The date he chose for its founding, May 1, 1776, would later take on almost mythic significance, appearing in countless theories about the group's supposed enduring influence. Initially, Weishaupt called his organization the Perfectibilists, reflecting his belief that humanity could be improved through education and moral development. Only later did he adopt the more evocative name, Illuminati, from the Latin word meaning enlightened ones. The early membership consisted largely of Weishaupt's students and colleagues, progressive-minded men who shared his frustration with Bavaria's conservative Catholic society and the limitations it placed on intellectual freedom. The Illuminati might have remained a small, obscure group had it not been for the recruitment of Baron Adolf von Knigge in 1780. A well-connected Freemason with extensive knowledge of esoteric societies, Knigge brought valuable organizational skills and social connections to the fledgling order. Under his influence, the Illuminati adopted a hierarchical structure with elaborate rituals and initiations, modeled partly on Freemasonry, though with distinctly different aims. The society was organized into 3 primary classes, each containing multiple degrees through which members could advance. New initiates began in the nursery class as novices, progressing to Minervals, named after the Roman goddess of wisdom, and finally to Illuminatus Minor. The second class borrowed heavily from Masonic traditions, while the third and highest class, the Mysteries, revealed the order's true philosophical aims and was reserved for only the most trusted members. Like many secret societies of the era, the Illuminati used pseudonyms, coded correspondence, and secret symbols to protect their communications. Weishaupt himself adopted the alias Spartacus after the leader of the Roman slave rebellion, while Knigge was known as Philo. The group's primary symbol was the Owl of Minerva, representing wisdom, while their calendar renamed months and recounted years from the Persian era, a deliberate departure from the Christian calendar. The Illuminati's methods for expanding their influence were remarkably strategic. Rather than creating entirely new lodges, they practiced what might now be called entry-ism, encouraging members to join existing Masonic lodges and gradually influence them from within. This approach proved effective, and by the early 1780s, the order had expanded well beyond Bavaria, establishing a presence throughout German-speaking lands, Italy, Hungary, and France. At its peak, the Illuminati claimed between 650 and 500 members, including influential nobles, politicians, physicians, and intellectuals. Notable among these was Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the celebrated German author whose works like Faust would become cornerstones of Western literature. Though his level of involvement remains debated by historians, Goethe's connection to the order exemplifies how the Illuminati had begun to attract some of the finest minds of the Enlightenment era. Other members included the composer Christian Bode and various German dukes and princes, giving the order connections to the corridors of power. This rapid expansion, however, contained the seeds of the order's downfall. As membership grew, so did internal conflicts, particularly between Weishaupt and Nigge, who disagreed over the direction and governance of the society. Their relationship deteriorated until 1784, when Nigge left the order entirely, a significant blow to both its organizational structure and its recruitment capabilities. More dangerous than these internal divisions was the growing suspicion from external authorities. Conservative forces in Bavaria, particularly the Jesuits, whom Weishaupt had once criticized, began to view the Illuminati as a dangerous revolutionary organization that threatened traditional religion and social order. Their fears were not entirely unfounded, as the order did indeed advocate for radical ideas like republicanism, gender equality, and the separation of church and state. The decisive moment came in June 1784, when Karl Theodor, the Duke of Bavaria, issued an edict banning all secret societies not authorized by law. Though not specifically named in this first decree, the Illuminati recognized the threat and began to dissolve their formal structures while maintaining informal connections. A year later, in March 1785, the Duke issued a second, more explicit edict, specifically condemning the Illuminati by name. The situation deteriorated further when Bavarian authorities began seizing documents from prominent members. In 1786, they raided the home of Xavier Zwack, one of Weishaupt's most trusted associates, discovering detailed membership lists, secret codes, and controversial writings on topics like suicide and atheism. The government published these materials in a series of exposés called Original Writings of the Order of the Illuminati, creating a scandal that reverberated throughout Europe. Faced with persecution, Weishaupt fled Bavaria in February 1785, finding refuge in Gotha under the protection of sympathetic Duke Ernest II. From exile, he continued to write and defend his ideas, but the order he had created was effectively finished. Its members scattered, some recanting their involvement, others facing imprisonment or exile. By 1787, just 11 years after its founding, the Illuminati had ceased to exist as an organized entity. Yet, in a strange historical irony, the physical dissolution of the Illuminati marked not their end but their transformation into something perhaps more powerful, a symbol that would take on a life of its own in the collective imagination. The timing of their suppression, just years before the French Revolution erupted in 1789, led many to draw connections between the two events, despite limited evidence of direct Illuminati involvement in France. This perceived connection was amplified by writers like Abbé Augustin Baruel in France and John Robison in Scotland, who independently published works in 1797–98, claiming that the Illuminati had survived their suppression and orchestrated the revolution as part of a grand conspiracy to overthrow all monarchies and religions. These works found a receptive audience, particularly among those seeking to explain the unprecedented chaos and violence of the revolutionary period. As the 19th century progressed, the legend of the Illuminati continued to evolve and expand, absorbing other conspiracy theories and becoming increasingly detached from historical reality. They were variously accused of manipulating the financial system, assassinating world leaders, and secretly controlling governments through shadowy networks of influence. Each major historical event, from the Napoleonic Wars to the Russian Revolution, prompted new theories about their supposed involvement. The 20th century brought new dimensions to the Illuminati myth. The rise of mass media allowed conspiracy theories to spread more widely than ever before, while the unprecedented scale of world wars, economic depressions, and ideological conflicts seemed to demand equally grand explanations. Fiction and popular culture increasingly incorporated Illuminati references, further blurring the line between historical fact and creative imagination. Today, as you drift towards sleep, the Illuminati exist primarily as a cultural touchstone invoked in movies, novels, video games, and music lyrics, often with little connection to the small group of Enlightenment intellectuals who gathered in Bavaria nearly 250 years ago. The all-seeing eye that appears on the U.S. dollar bill, frequently cited as evidence of Illuminati influences, actually an unrelated Masonic symbol later adopted as part of the Great Seal of the United States. Claims about Illuminati membership among celebrities and politicians would have bewildered Adam Weishaupt, whose concerns were philosophical and political rather than focused on cultural influence. Perhaps what makes the Illuminati story so enduring is not just its mysterious elements, but the deeper human needs it addresses. In a complex world where cause and effect are often difficult to trace, where power operates through obscure institutional channels, conspiracy theories offer the comfort of simplicitia, single explanation for disparate events, a identifiable villain behind life's misfortunes. They transform the frightening randomness of history into a coherent narrative, however ominous. As consciousness gently fades and sleep approaches, consider that the true legacy of the historical Illuminati may lie not in any ongoing secret influence, but in the questions they raised about authority, knowledge, and social organization. In their brief existence, they championed ideals, reason over superstition, education over ignorance, merit over inherited privilege, that would eventually become mainstream values in many societies. Their methods may have been secretive, but many of their goals are now openly embraced. So sleep well, dear dreamer, and perhaps in your dreams, you might glimpse not the mythical, all-powerful Illuminati of conspiracy lore, but a small group of imperfect idealists who dared to imagine a different kind of world during the twilight of the old order. For in that vision, however flawed its implementation, lies a story not just of secret rituals and coded messages, but of humanity's enduring quest to shed light upon darkness and to remake society according to our highest aspirations. Within the ivy-covered walls of Yale University, beneath the shadows of New England's elms, a society was born in 1832 that would become one of America's most enduring enigmas. Known to its members as the Order, and to the outside world as Skull and Bones, this brotherhood would weave itself into the fabric of American power for nearly 2 centuries. From presidents to business titans, from spy masters to cultural icons, its membership roster reads like a who's who of American influence. As you rest your head upon your pillow, dear dreamer, let us journey back to 19th century New Haven to uncover the origins and evolution of this most secretive of collegiate societies. The story begins with William Huntington Russell, a Yale student who had spent time studying in Germany, where he encountered the philosophical discussions and secret student societies that flourished in European universities. Upon his return to America, Russell joined with Alphonso Taft, who would later serve as Attorney General and Secretary of War under President Grant, and whose son William Howard Taft would become the 27th Presidente, establish their own society. Originally called the Eulogian Club, it soon adopted the more evocative name and symbolism that would become its trademark, a skull and crossbones. From its inception, Skull and Bones distinguished itself from other collegiate societies through its exclusivity and secrecy. While many fraternities sought to expand to multiple campuses, the order remained stubbornly singular, existing only at Yale. Each year, only 15 seniors, originally all male, wealthy, and predominantly white, would be tapped for membership in a public ceremony that was itself part of Yale tradition. To be tapped for bones was to be marked for future success, a prophecy that often fulfilled itself through the connections the society provided. The physical headquarters of the society quickly became as legendary as the organization itself. In 1856, the Russell Trust Association, the Societies Incorporated, name-built a windowless, fortress-like structure on Yale's campus. Known as the Tomb, this imposing sandstone building stands in stark contrast to the collegiate Gothic architecture surrounding it. No windows pierce its lower floors, and those few on the upper level are carefully screened from prying eyes. For generations, Yale students have passed this building with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, wondering what rituals unfold within its secretive chambers. And rituals there certainly are, though their exact nature remains one of America's best-kept secrets. The fragments that have emerged from former members suggest ceremonies involving coffins, skeletons, and mock deaths and rebirths. New initiates reportedly must recount their personal histories, including their sexual experiences, in great detail to their fellow bonesmen. Some accounts speak of members receiving new names within the society and participating in elaborate role-playing scenarios that blur the line between theater and psychological conditioning. Perhaps most intriguing are the rumors of stolen artifacts housed within the tomb. Chief among these is the story of Geronimo's skull, allegedly stolen from the Apache leader's grave by bonesmen serving in the U.S. Army, including Prescott Bush father and grandfather to future presidents. While the society has never confirmed possession of this grim trophy, and the Apache tribe's lawsuit seeking its return was dismissed on technical grounds, the legend illustrates how Skull and Bones has always existed at the intersection of privilege, power, and a certain cavalier attitude toward conventional morality. The society's greatest strength has always been its alumni network, extending into the highest levels of American finance, politics, media, and intelligence services. 3 U.S. Presidents William Howard Taft, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush were bonesmen. When the younger Bush ran against fellow bonesman John Kerry in the 2004 presidential election, it marked a unique moment in American politics. Regardless of the outcome, a member of this tiny society would occupy the White House. Beyond the presidency, Bonesmen have led the CIA, including James Jesus Angleton, the legendary counterintelligence chief, founded powerful investment banks, directed the American cultural establishment through positions at museums and universities, and shaped foreign policy as diplomats and advisors. The journalist and bonesman Henry Luce founded Time magazine, creating a media empire that would help define how Americans understood their place in the American century, a term Luce himself coined. This concentration of members in positions of influence has inevitably fueled speculation about the society's purpose and activities. Some critics view it as little more than a networking club for the already privileged, a way of ensuring that power remains concentrated within certain families and social circles. Others see something more sinister, a shadow government or an American Illuminati, coordinating policy across institutions to serve the interests of its members. The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere between these extremes. What is certain is that Skull and Bones creates powerful bonds among its members, bonds that transcend the usual divisions of politics and profession. When a bonesman enters a room containing another member, they are said to be able to recognize each other through subtle signs and to feel an immediate kinship despite any apparent differences. In a nation often divided by partisanship, such cross-cutting ties can have significant consequences. The society has not remained static over its nearly 2 centuries of existence. Once an exclusive preserve of white Protestant males from wealthy families, it has gradually, belatedly evolved to reflect broader changes in American society. In 1991, after intense campus debate and legal pressure, Skull and Bones finally began admitting women, a change that some older alumni reportedly considered so heretical that they advocated burning the tomb rather than allowing female members to enter its sacred spaces. The society has also faced increasing scrutiny in recent decades, as America's tolerance for old boys networks and secret power structures has waned. Journalists have attempted to infiltrate its meetings, climb its walls, and pierce its veil of secrecy. In 2001, 2 intrepid reporters even managed to secretly film parts of an initiation ceremony, though the grainy night vision footage revealed more about the mundane aspects of the ritual than its symbolic significance. Yale itself has had an ambivalent relationship with its most famous secret society. While officially maintaining a distance from Skull and Bones and other tomb societies, the university has long recognized their importance to campus culture and alumni loyalty. The annual Tap Day, when new members are selected, was once an official university event, and Yale has historically protected the society's property rights and privacy, even as student activists have occasionally demanded greater transparency. The 21st century has brought new challenges to this centuries-old institution. In an era of social media and diminishing privacy, maintaining the absolute secrecy that once surrounded Skull and Bones has become increasingly difficult. Former members have occasionally broken their vows of silence, publishing memoirs or giving interviews that offer glimpses behind the curtain, though these accounts often raise as many questions as they answer. More fundamentally, the society faces questions about its relevance in a changed America. As elite universities like Yale have become more meritocratic and diverse, the old networks of family and social connections that once defined American power have evolved. The paths to influence are more varied now, less dependent on the kinds of connections that societies like Bones once exclusively provided. Tech entrepreneurs, social media influencers, and grassroots organizers can achieve forms of power and cultural impact that would have been unimaginable in the 19th century. Yet Skull and Bones endures, adapting to these changes while maintaining its essential character. Each year, 15 Yale seniors still receive the tap on the shoulder that marks them for membership. Each Thursday and Sunday night, they still gather in the tomb for meetings known only to themselves. Each new initiate still lies in a coffin and confesses their hopes, fears, and secrets to their fellow bonesmen. And each still emerges with connections that will follow them throughout their lives, opening doors and creating obligations that remain invisible to outsiders. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Skull and Bones is not its secrecy or its powerful members, but its longevity. In a nation often characterized by reinvention and disruption, here is an institution that has maintained its traditions and influence across 3 centuries. Presidents have come and gone, wars have been fought, cultural revolutions have transformed American society, yet still the order continues, initiating new members into ancient mysteries that predate the Civil War. As your eyelids grow heavy and the conscious world begins to fade, consider that somewhere in New Haven tonight, in a sandstone building without windows, young men and women are participating in rituals nearly identical to those experienced by their predecessors almost 200 years ago. They recite the same words, handle the same ceremonial objects, and forge the same bonds of loyalty and trust. In doing so, they connect themselves not just to each other, but to a lineage that stretches back through generations of American power and privilege. May your dreams carry you through hidden chambers and secret passages, past cryptic symbols and whispered oaths, into a world where privilege and mystery still walk hand in hand through the shadowed corridors of power. And as you drift deeper into slumber, remember that in America's secret societies, as in its grandest public institutions, the past is never fully past it, lives on in traditions maintained, in connections forged, and in the subtle, enduring influence of those who know the meaning behind the skull and bones. Beneath the tumultuous surface of early 17th century Europe, as religious wars ravaged the continent and the Renaissance gave way to the scientific revolution, a mysterious announcement appeared that would captivate the imagination of scholars and mystics for centuries to come. Published anonymously in 1614, a small book called the Fama Fraternitatis proclaimed the existence of a secret brotherhood dedicated to esoteric wisdom, spiritual enlightenment, and the healing arts, the Fraternity of the Rosy Cross, or Rosicrucians. As you settle into the comfort of your bed, dear dreamer, let us explore the enigmatic origins and enduring legacy of this most mystical of secret societies. The Rosicrucian story centers around an almost certainly mythical figure, Christian Rosenkreutz, whose name translates to Christian of the Rosy Cross. According to the Fama, Rosenkreutz was born to a noble German family in 1378 but was orphaned at a young age and placed in a monastery. Dissatisfied with the limited knowledge of his Christian teachers, the young man embarked on a pilgrimage to the Middle East, where he studied with Arab sages, learned the secrets of nature and medicine, and was initiated into ancient mysteries unknown to European scholars. Upon returning to Europe, the story continues. Rosenkreutz attempted to share his revelations with learned men, but was met with ridicule and rejection. Undeterred, he gathered a small circle of trusted disciples who became the first Rosicrucian Brotherhood. Together, they built a mysterious headquarters called the House of the Holy Spirit, where they practiced their arts, healed the sick without payment, and prepared for a coming transformation of European society. When Rosenkreutz died at the remarkable age of 106, he was entombed in a secret vault designed to be discovered 120 years after his death, the discovery that would supposedly herald a new age of enlightenment. The Fama was followed in 1615 by a second manifesto, the Confessio Fraternitatis, which elaborated on the Brotherhood's philosophy and aims. A year later came The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, an allegorical romance describing Rosenkreuz's invitation to a royal wedding that serves as a metaphor for spiritual transformation and alchemical processes. Together, these three works, known as the Rosicrucian Manifestos, created a sensation across intellectual Europe, despite the fact that no one could actually locate the Brotherhood or its mysterious headquarters. Scholars have long debated whether the Rosicrucians actually existed when the manifestos were published, or whether they were a literary invention that later inspired real organizations. The most likely author of at least some of the manifestos was Johann Valentin Andreae, a Lutheran theologian and reformer who later claimed the chemical wedding as a youthful literary jest. However, evidence suggests he worked with a circle of like-minded scholars and mystics at the University of Tübingen who shared concerns about the religious conflicts devastating Europe and sought a more universal, tolerant approach to spirituality and knowledge. Whether intentionally or not, the manifestos appeared at precisely the right historical moment to capture widespread imagination. Europe was in the midst of profound transformation. The medieval worldview was crumbling. New scientific discoveries were challenging ancient authorities. Religious wars were devastating communities. And there was widespread hunger for both spiritual renewal and practical knowledge that could improve human lives. The manifestos promised both: a spiritual brotherhood that possessed not only mystical wisdom, but practical knowledge of medicine, mathematics, and natural philosophy. The Rosicrucian philosophy, as outlined in the manifestos, represented a unique synthesis of multiple intellectual traditions. It drew from Renaissance Hermeticism, revival of ancient Egyptian and Greek mystical texts, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, who was believed to possess divine wisdom. It incorporated elements of Jewish Kabbalah, Christian mysticism, and alchemy, not merely as a quest to transform base metals into gold, but as a spiritual practice of purification and transformation of the soul. It embraced Paracelsian medicine, which rejected Galenic traditions in favor of chemical remedies and a more holistic understanding of health. Central to Rosicrucian symbolism was the rose cross, itself a cross, with a rose at its center, combining Christian symbolism with the rose's ancient associations with secrecy, mystery, and rebirth. This elegantly simple emblem encapsulated the movement's attempt to reconcile seemingly opposed traditions: Christianity and pagan wisdom, science and mysticism, the rational and the intuitive. The symbol's layers of meaning reflected the Rosicrucian belief that truth must be uncovered gradually, through contemplation and initiation, rather than direct instruction. The manifestos created an immediate intellectual firestorm. Throughout Europe, scholars, physicians, and mystics published hundreds of pamphlets, either declaring their allegiance to the Brotherhood or denouncing it as heretical or fraudulent. Some placed advertisements in public places, attempting to contact the mysterious fraternity. René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, is said to have searched for Rosicrucians in Germany, while Sir Francis Bacon's utopian work New Atlantis shows clear Rosicrucian influences. Robert Fludd, a prominent English physician and mystic, emerged as one of the most vocal defenders of the Brotherhood, publishing elaborate treatises on Rosicrucian philosophy despite claiming he was not himself a member. Despedier, perhaps because of the impossibility of finding the actual brotherhood described in the manifestos, Rosicrucian ideas influenced the development of various intellectual movements and organizations. They shaped early Freemasonry, contributed to the scientific methods of the Royal Society in England, and provided inspiration for countless esoteric groups that would emerge in subsequent centuries. The manifesto's emphasis on both spiritual wisdom and practical knowledge reflected a holistic approach to understanding that would later be fragmented by the increasing specialization of modern science. The 30 Years' War that devastated Central Europe between 1618 and 1648 largely drowned out public discussion of Rosicrucianism. The war's religious violence and destruction seemed to mock the manifesto's optimistic vision of spiritual and intellectual renewal. As Europe emerged from the conflict, the scientific revolution was accelerating, and its emphasis on empirical observation and mathematical precision left less room for the kind of mystical natural philosophy advocated by the Rosicrucians. The movement appeared to go underground or dissolve entirely. Yet the Rosicrucian current continued to flow beneath the surface of European intellectual life, resurfacing in various forms throughout the 18th century. In Germany, the Gold- und Rosenkreuz, Gold and Rosy Cross, emerged as a Rosicrucian order that attracted numerous members of the nobility and exerted significant political influence. In France, the Martinist order founded by Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin preserved elements of Rosicrucian thought while developing a more explicitly Christian mystical philosophy. These and other groups kept alive the dream of a spiritual brotherhood that could transcend religious and national divisions. The 19th century saw a full-fledged Rosicrucian revival, particularly in France and England. Figures like Paschal Beverly Randolph, Eliphas Levi, and later the founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn reinterpreted Rosicrucian symbolism and practices for a new age. These Victorian-era occultists were often less interested in natural philosophy and medicine than their predecessors, focusing instead on ceremonial magic, astral travel, and communication with non-physical entities. They situated Rosicrucianism within a broader Western esoteric tradition that they sought to preserve and revitalize. The modern era has seen the establishment of several prominent organizations claiming Rosicrucian lineage or inspiration. Founded in 1915 by H. Spencer Lewis, the ancient mystical order Rosicrucis, Amorc, became perhaps the most visible, establishing headquarters in San Jose, California, complete with an Egyptian-inspired temple and museum. Amorc offered correspondence courses in mysticism, healing, and psychic development to members worldwide, adapting ancient wisdom to modern sensibilities, and presenting itself as a non-sectarian philosophical and educational organization rather than a religious body. Other groups include Max Heindel's Rosicrucian Fellowship, focused on Christian mysticism and astrology, the Lectorium Rosicrucianum, founded in the Netherlands with an emphasis on Gnostic Christianity, and the Confraternity of the Rose Cross, which claims a more direct lineage to earlier European Rosicrucian orders. Each offers its own interpretation of Rosicrucian teachings, though all generally emphasize personal spiritual development, healing practices, and the study of metaphysical laws. Contemporary Rosicrucian organizations typically operate through a degree system, with members progressing through various levels of teaching as they demonstrate mastery of concepts and practices. The early degrees often focus on basic principles of natural law, meditation techniques, and ethical development. Higher degrees introduce more complex metaphysical concepts, healing methods, and symbolic interpretations of ancient texts. This gradual unveiling of teachings reflects the original manifesto's emphasis on incremental revelation of wisdom to those prepared to receive it. What distinguishes Rosicrucianism from many other esoteric traditions is its consistent emphasis on practical application. From the medical focus of the original manifestos to the healing and self-improvement techniques taught by modern orders, Rosicrucians have generally sought to demonstrate the value of esoteric knowledge through tangible benefits to human well-being. This pragmatic element has helped the tradition maintain relevance across centuries of changing intellectual fashions. The Rosicrucian worldview typically embraces certain core concepts: that the material world is pervaded by spiritual forces that can be perceived and directed by the trained mind, that humans possess latent faculties that can be awakened through specific practices, that the microcosm, the individual, reflects the macrocosm, the universe, in its essential patterns, and that symbolic language can communicate truths that transcend ordinary expression. These ideas place Rosicrucianism firmly within the broader tradition of Western esotericism while giving it distinctive emphases. As the digital age transforms how knowledge is shared and communities form, Rosicrucian organizations have adapted accordingly. Online courses now supplement or replace traditional correspondence lessons, while virtual temples and meditation sessions connect members across continents. Yet the essential approach remains remarkably consistent with that outlined in those mysterious manifestos 4 centuries ago: progressive unveiling of wisdom that integrates spiritual insight with practical knowledge. As you drift closer to the borders of sleep, consider the enduring appeal of the Rosicrucian Vijuna world, where science and spirituality are not antagonists but complementary approaches to understanding reality's mysteries. In an age often characterized by specialization and fragmentation of knowledge, the Rosicrucian ideal of the complete human being, knowledgeable in arts and sciences, while spiritually developed, offers a holistic alternative that continues to attract seekers worldwide. May your journey toward slumber be illuminated by the gentle light of the rose upon the cross, that ancient symbol of transformation and hidden wisdom. And as consciousness gives way to dreams, perhaps you'll glimpse the mystical vault of Christian Rosenkreuz, its walls inscribed with sacred geometries, its space suffused with the soft glow of an ever-burning lampen, enduring metaphor for the undying flame of wisdom that continues to shine through centuries of darkness and light. Among the ancient redwoods of Northern California, where mist clings to towering trunks and filtered sunlight creates dappled patterns on the forest floor, lies a 700-acre retreat that has hosted some of the most powerful men in American history. Presidents and captains of industry, artists and scientists, journalists and General Saul have gathered beneath these trees for a summer encampment unlike any other. Since 1872, the Bohemian Club has cultivated an aura of mystery and exclusivity, its woodland sanctuary, known as Bohemian Grove, becoming synonymous with privilege, power, and peculiar rituals. As you settle back against your pillow, dear dreamer, let us explore the history and practices of this uniquely American institution, where influence mingles with tradition behind a screen of towering redwood sentinels. The story begins not in the woods, but in the bustling city of San Francisco during the post-gold rush era. The year was 1872, and a group of journalists, artists, musicians, and writersmen who considered themselves Bohemians in the European sense, devoted to art and creativity rather than conventional pursuits, founded a gentlemen's club to nurture culture in what was still a relatively rough frontier city. Led by an editorial writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, these founders created a space where plays could be performed, music enjoyed, and conversations about art and literature could flourish among like-minded souls. The club's symbol and unofficial mascot became the owl, representing wisdom and vigilance. Its motto, "Weaving spiders come not here," was borrowed from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, and signified that business dealings and networking should be left outside the club's doors, though history would show this injunction to be honored more in the breach than the observance. From its earliest days, the club attracted men of prominence, with Mark Twain numbering among its early members. By the 1880s, the character of the club had begun to shift. Increasingly, wealthy businessmen and professionals joined its ranks, drawn by the prestige and connections it offered. What had begun as a haven for creative bohemians gradually evolved into a gathering place for the elite and powerful. Yet the club retained its artistic pretensions, requiring each member to have some demonstrated interest or ability in the arts, even if that interest was merely as a patron or appreciator. The first recorded summer encampment at what would become known as Bohemian Grove took place in 1878, when club members traveled to a rented site along the Russian River for a weekend of male bonding, artistic performances, and escape from the conventions of Victorian society. These summer retreats quickly became central to the club's identity. In 1899, the club purchased its own property near Monte Rio, California, establishing the permanent location of Bohemian Grove. The grove itself unfolds across a magnificent redwood forest, with the massive trees creating a cathedral-like atmosphere of hushed reverence. Over the decades, this woodland retreat was developed to include over 100 rustic camps, each with its own name, traditions, and membership. Lost Angels hosts Los Angeles members. Mandalay was long associated with high-ranking military officers. Owl's Nest traditionally welcomed presidents and their entourages, while Hillbillies gained fame for its concentration of prominent industrialists. The centerpiece of the grove is a large outdoor amphitheater facing a small lake, with a massive concrete owl standing some 40 feet tall overlooking the proceedings. It is here that the grove's most famous, or infamous ritual, takes place each year, the cremation of care ceremony. Opening the annual summer encampment, this elaborate theatrical production features robed figures, haunting music, and the ritualistic cremation of an effigy representing dull care, symbolizing the burning away of worldly concerns to allow for the carefree enjoyment of the grove's pleasures. This ceremony, with its dramatic pageantry and pseudo-religious overtones, has been the source of much speculation and conspiracy theorizing. Conducted under the watchful gaze of the concrete owl by firelight, with participants in costume, it presents a strange spectacle of powerful men engaged in theatrical ritual. Yet most scholars and journalists who have studied the ceremony describe it as essentially an elaborate piece of theater, more fraternity initiation than occult practice, a symbolic discarding of outside responsibilities before 2 weeks of revelry. Beyond this opening ceremony, the Grove's summer encampment revolves around a combination of relaxation, entertainment, and speeches. The days typically include lakeside talks, where prominent members speak informally on topics of interest, sometimes revealing policy ideas that would later become public positions. Evenings feature elaborate theatrical productions called Grove Plays, with original music and elaborate costumes, performed by club members for their fellows' entertainment. Between these scheduled events, men gather at their camps to drink, dine, and engage in what the club calls the greatest men's party on earth. The Grove's guest list over the decades reads like a who's who of American power and influence. Every Republican president since Herbert Hoover has been a member or guest at the Grove, with Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon frequently attending. The Bohemian connection to the presidency is perhaps most explicitly demonstrated in a photograph from 1967 showing Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon sitting alongside other future cabinet members at Bohemian Grovia, full year before Nixon would win the presidency with Reagan's support. Beyond presidents, the Grove has welcomed cabinet secretaries, Supreme Court justices, media moguls, bank presidents, defense contractors, oil executives, and the occasional European prime minister or Central American dictator. Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, Dick Cheney, Caspar Weinberger, and William Randolph Hearst are just a few of the notable figures who have walked beneath the redwoods during the summer encampment. Artists and entertainers have included Clint Eastwood, Bing Crosby, and Charlton Heston, maintaining at least a symbolic connection to the club's artistic origins. The Grove's significance extends beyond its guest list to the informal conversations and relationships it has fostered. In 1942, discussions at the Grove helped advance the Manhattan Project, which would develop the atomic bomb. 40 years later, Caspar Weinberger's lakeside talk as defense secretary previewed the military buildup that would mark the Reagan administration. While no specific policies may emerge fully formed from Grove conversations, the opportunity for powerful men to speak candidly away from public scrutiny has undoubtedly shaped decisions affecting millions. This combination of power, secrecy, ritual, and exclusivity has made Bohemian Grove a lightning rod for criticism and conspiracy theories. Its strict no women policy, except for female staff serving food and drinks, has drawn condemnation as anachronistic and discriminatory. Its membership, historically overwhelmingly white and wealthy, reflects patterns of privilege and exclusion in American society more broadly. The private security force that patrols its perimeter ensures that uninvited eyes cannot witness what transpires beneath the redwoods. More extreme theories have cast the Grove as everything from a satanic cult to the secret headquarters of the supposed New World Order. In 2000, controversial radio host Alex Jones infiltrated the encampment and filmed portions of the cremation of care ceremony, later presenting this footage as evidence of occult practices rather than theatrical pageantry. Such interpretations, though dismissed by scholars and journalists who have studied the club more thoroughly, persist in certain corners of the Internet. More substantive criticisms focus on the potential policy implications of powerful figures meeting in private beyond democratic oversight. When government officials, media moguls, and corporate leaders gather in an atmosphere of secrecy and exclusivity, questions naturally arise about what deals might be struck or understandings reached away from public view. The Grove's defenders counter that its atmosphere of relaxation and play makes it an unlikely venue for serious policymaking, despite the concentration of influence among its attendees. Environmental concerns have also dogged the club. Its ownership of a pristine redwood forest stand, the exclusive use of this natural treasure by a small group of privileged men, has drawn criticism from environmental activists. Periodic protests outside the Grove's gates have highlighted issues ranging from environmental stewardship to the club's exclusionary membership policies to the concentration of power among its attendees. Like many elite institutions, the Bohemian Club has faced pressure to evolve with changing social norms. Its membership, once almost exclusively white, has gradually diversified to include some men of color, though it remains predominantly white. Its once total exclusion of women has been challenged in court, though women remain banned from the summer encampment and most club activities. These incremental changes reflect both external pressures and internal debates about the club's future in a changing society. The digital age has brought new challenges to the Grove's traditional secrecy. Smartphones are banned during the encampment, and members are forbidden from discussing Grove activities with outsiders. Yet, in an era of ubiquitous recording devices and social media, maintaining the veil of privacy that once surrounded the retreat has become increasingly difficult. Leaked photographs, surreptitious recordings, and first-hand accounts from former staff have all contributed to a gradual erosion of the mystery that once shrouded the summer gathering. Today, as you drift towards sleep, the Bohemian Club continues its traditions in the Redwood Sanctuary, much as it has for nearly 150 years. Each July, the same ritual burning of care takes place beneath the massive owl statue. The same camps welcome their members back to rustic cabins and tents. The same mixture of performance, relaxation, and networking occurs among the dappled shadows of ancient trees. Yet the world outside the grove has changed dramatically, raising questions about the future of this peculiar American institution. Perhaps what makes the Bohemian Grove so fascinating is how it embodies contradictions at the heart of American culture. It represents both artistic aspiration and raw power, playful escape and serious influence, democratic values and elite exclusivity. Its members include both creators and capitalists, often in the same person. Its rituals blend European traditions with distinctly American showmanship and pragmatism. It is, in many ways, a microcosm of the tensions and paradoxes that have shaped the American experience. As consciousness begins to fade and dreams approach, imagine the scene among those towering redwoods, the flicker of torchlight on ancient bark, the murmur of conversation between men who shape industries and policies, the haunting music of the cremation ceremony drifting through branches that have witnessed a century and a half of secret gatherings. Whatever one thinks of its politics or practices, the Bohemian Grove stands as one of America's most distinctive and enduring elite retreats, a place where power and play have mingled beneath the watchful gaze of a concrete owl for generations. May your dreams wander through redwood groves where whispered conversations echo among ancient trees, where firelight dances against the night sky, and where the boundaries between theatrical ritual and genuine influence blur in the California mist. For in understanding the Bohemian Grove, we glimpse not just a secretive retreat for the powerful, but a uniquely American creation where artistic pretension and practical power, theatrical ritual, and real-world consequence have intertwined beneath the canopy of history's silent witnesses. In the shadow of larger fraternal orders, where whispered oaths and ancient symbols blend into the fabric of American society, there exists a society both hidden and revealed. As the gaslit halls of the 19th century welcomed women into spaces previously reserved for men, a new star was beginning to rise in the firmament of secret societies. Tonight, as you drift towards slumber's embrace, let us explore the veiled history of the Order of the Eastern Star, where biblical heroines and Masonic traditions intertwine beneath the watchful gaze of a mysterious pentagram. The year was 1850, though the seeds were planted earlier, in a nation still finding its identity. While the Freemasons had long established their brotherhood across America, their halls remained forbidden to the wives, daughters, mothers, widows, and sisters who stood beside them. Into this void stepped a lawyer and educator named Rob Morris, a devoted Mason who dreamed of creating something different, a parallel order where women connected to Masonry could participate in their own rituals and mysteries. Morris, having studied Freemasonry extensively, believed deeply in its moral teachings, yet recognized its fundamental limitation. As he watched his wife Charlotte excluded from the fellowship that gave him such purpose, he pondered a solution that would honor both Masonic tradition and the women who supported it from afar. He began crafting a system of degrees based on biblical heroines, virtuous women whose stories could serve as exemplars of the values he wished to instill. The organization that emerged bore a name both poetic and significant: the Order of the Eastern Star. The name itself evoked the star that guided the Magi to Bethlehem, a celestial light leading wise ones toward revelation. At its center stood an inverted pentagram, each point illuminated with a different color, each representing a heroine from Scripture whose virtues members would aspire to embody. As twilight shadows lengthened across the American landscape, Morris's creation spread slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. The ritual he designed was elaborate and beautiful, filled with symbolic journeys that mirrored life's passages. Women and master masons alike were initiated into chambers where biblical tales were not merely recounted but enacted, their moral lessons woven into the fabric of ceremonial regalia and carefully choreographed movements. The heroines chosen by Morris represented a constellation of virtues: Ada, exemplifying the duty to keep one's vows; Ruth, demonstrating unwavering loyalty; Esther, showing courage and fidelity; Martha, embodying faith even in death's shadow; and Electa, representing endurance through persecution. Together, they formed the points of the mystical star around which the order's teachings revolved. Yet beneath the public face of charity and fellowship lay deeper currents. Unlike many fraternal orders of its day, the Eastern Star did not fully conceal its rituals, but neither did it reveal them completely. Its members learned secret signs, grips, and passwords, methods of recognition that allowed sisters and brothers to identify one another across the divides of geography and circumstance. They swore solemn obligations upon the Bible, pledging fidelity to the order's principles and protection of its mysteries. By the 1870s, the order was transformed under the leadership of Robert McCoy, who standardized its rituals and administrative structure. What had been a loosely organized set of chapters became a cohesive body with grand chapters governing state operations and, eventually, a general grand chapter overseeing the whole. The ceremonial aspects grew more elaborate, with officers bearing titles like Worthy Matron and Worthy Patron, presiding over meetings from stations arranged in the shape of a star. As gaslight gave way to electric illumination and horse-drawn carriages to automobiles, the Eastern Star's influence reached its zenith in the early 20th century. Hundreds of thousands of members gathered in chapter rooms across America and beyond, their numbers swelling as the post-Civil War era's fascination with fraternal orders reached its peak. Grand chapter buildings rose in cities, large and small, their architecture often incorporating the symbolic five-pointed star into facades and stained glass windows. But what truly set the Order of the Eastern Star apart was its pioneering approach to gender. While not fully egalitarian by modern standards, only men with Masonic affiliation could join, and leadership positions traditionally alternated between women and men, it nevertheless offered women rare access to organizational power in an age before they could even vote. Within their star-shaped chapter rooms, women served as worthy matrons, presiding over meetings and directing ritual work with an authority often denied them in the outside world. The Order's philanthropic works, too, expanded dramatically. Scholarship funds for young women pursuing education, homes for aged members, support for widows and orphans, all became hallmarks of Eastern Star charity. During the World Wars, chapters organized relief efforts, selling bonds and rolling bandages with the same disciplined approach they brought to their ceremonies. Yet beneath this outward success, cultural currents were shifting. As the 20th century progressed, the appeal of fraternal orders began to wane. The elaborate rituals and hierarchical structures that had once seemed so compelling now struck many as anachronistic. Younger generations sought different forms of community and service. Membership, which had once numbered in the millions, began a slow but steady decline. Still, in smaller cities and towns across America, chapter rooms continued to glow with candlelight as members enacted the ancient lessons of their heroines. Behind doors marked with the familiar star, initiates still learned the signs and passwords, still pledged themselves to principles of love, relief, and truth. The order adapted, if slowly, to changing times, relaxing some membership requirements, updating language, embracing new technologies. Today, the Order of the Eastern Star continues its quiet work, a smaller but still significant presence in the landscape of American fraternal organizations. Its members still gather around altars where the Bible lies open, still circumambulate in patterns established more than a century and a half ago. And while its influence has diminished, its legacy persists in the lives it has touched and the charitable works it has performed. What secrets remain within this star-shaped order? Perhaps it is not the passwords or signs that constitute its true mystery, but rather the enduring appeal of ritual and belonging in an increasingly fragmented world. Perhaps the greatest secret of the Eastern Star is how it has provided generations of women and men a space where ancient virtues still matter, where symbolic journeys still transform, where community still forms around shared ideals rather than mere proximity or convenience. As you drift toward sleep's gentle embrace, consider these 5 heroines and their lessons: duty, loyalty, courage, faith, and endurance. Consider how their ancient stories found new life in dimly lit chapter rooms across America, guiding generations through the complexities of modernity with wisdom from the distant past. Consider the star that rises in the east, not just as a celestial body, but as a symbol of light that persists even as shadows deepen. For in the story of the Eastern Star, we find a reflection of humanity's enduring need for meaning and connection, for ritual and revelation. And as consciousness fades into dreams, perhaps you too will glimpse that guiding star, leading you toward your own inner chambers of wisdom and virtue. So sleep well, dear dreamer, beneath the gentle light of stars, both seen and symbolic, as ancient heroines keep their silent vigil through the night. In the shadow of a shattered Europe, as the ashes of global conflict still smoldered across a war-torn continent, a new form of power began to coalesce in the quiet corners of diplomatic circles. It was 1954, a time when the world still trembled from memories of destruction, yet looked cautiously toward rebuilding connections severed by war. As you settle into the comfort of your bed tonight, let us journey through the mist-shrouded origins of what some call the most influential shadow organization of our modern age, a gathering where power speaks to power behind closed doors, where decisions affecting millions might be contemplated over coffee and cognac. The story begins not with conspiracy, but with concern. In the early 1950s, as the Cold War intensified its grip on global politics, relationships between North America and Europe were strained by misunderstandings and diverging priorities. A Polish-born political scientist named Joseph Rettinger, concerned about the growing friction between these Western allies, conceived of a forum where leaders could speak frankly beyond the constraints of public scrutiny. His vision? A private conference where influential figures from politics, industry, finance, and academia could build personal relationships that might transcend national interests. Rettinger found a willing partner in Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, whose royal connections provided the necessary gravitas to attract high-profile participants. Together, they convened the first meeting at the Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, Netherlands, a name that would forever after be associated with their creation. Around elegantly appointed tables, beneath crystal chandeliers, delegates from 13 Western nations gathered for 3 days of candid discussion. No press was allowed, no minutes were officially kept, and participants were encouraged to speak not as representatives of their countries or organizations, but as individuals freed from the constraints of official positions. What began as a singular event became an institution. Each year thereafter, between 120 and 150 individuals, carefully selected for their influence in politics, business, media, academia, and other domains, received the coveted invitation bearing the Bilderberg name. The venues changed, luxury hotels in scenic locations across Europe and North America, but the format remained consistent: absolute privacy, Chatham House rules, and a carefully curated agenda addressing the pressing international issues of the day. As the decades passed, the Bilderberg Group evolved into something more than a mere conference. Its steering committee, composed of approximately 30 members who remained relatively constant over the years, cultivated a powerful network that transcended national boundaries and traditional power structures. Former attendees ascended to presidencies, prime ministerships, and the helms of global corporations with such frequency that observers began to wonder if Bilderberg served as a vetting ground for future leaders. Bill Clinton attended in 1991, 1 year before his election, Tony Blair in 1993, 4 years before becoming prime minister, Emmanuel Macron shortly before his meteoric rise to the French presidency. The participants themselves represented a pantheon of global influence: Henry Kissinger, a perennial attendee; David Rockefeller, banker and philanthropist; Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands; chancellors, prime ministers, CEOs of multinational corporations, media moguls, and technology titans. Together they formed what political scientists C. Wright Mills might have called a perfect example of the power elite, individuals whose decisions could redirect economies, reshape geopolitical alliances, and influence the lives of billions. Yet it was the secrecy that transformed Bilderberg from a high-level networking event into the subject of endless speculation. The group published no manifestos, issued no communiques, and admitted no journalists except those invited as participants who agreed to the confidentiality rules. The hotels hosting Bilderberg meetings were temporarily transformed into fortresses, with security perimeters, identification checks, and sophisticated surveillance to ensure that the discussions remained private. This opacity, coupled with the undeniable power of its participants, created fertile ground for theories about Bilderberg's true purpose. Some saw in Bilderberg the shadow of global governance, an unelected body making decisions that would later be implemented through official channels. Others perceived it as the coordination center for what they termed the New World Order, a phrase that echoed through the corridors of alternative media and late-night radio shows. The group's own statements, rare as they were, described something more modest: a space for informal dialogue, for building understanding among different perspectives, for exploring complex global challenges free from the pressure of immediate policy decisions. As the millennium turned and a new century dawned, the world around Bilderberg changed dramatically. The Internet shattered old information monopolies, making total secrecy increasingly difficult to maintain. Protesters began to gather outside Bilderberg venues, their numbers growing with each passing year. Journalists and bloggers staked out hotels, photographed arriving participants, and published speculation about what might be discussed behind guarded doors. The age of absolute privacy was ending, even for the most privileged circles. In response, the organization made modest concessions to transparency. A website appeared, listing participants and general topics to be discussed. Press releases were issued before and after meetings. Yet the core commitment to confidentiality remained unchanged. What was said in Bilderberg stayed in Bilderberg. This partial opening coincided with shifting power dynamics in the world at large, as emerging economies and new centers of influence challenged the Western-centric model that Bilderberg had always represented. By the 2010s, critics pointed to Bilderberg as emblematic of a global system increasingly viewed with suspicion, a symbol of elite disconnect from ordinary citizens' concerns. The financial crisis of 2008 had shattered faith in the economic wisdom of the very experts who populated Bilderberg's guest lists. Populist movements on both left and right targeted what they termed globalists, a term often directed at precisely the sort of transnational elite that gathered annually under the Bilderberg banner. Today, as the group continues its yearly meetings, it does so in a world fundamentally transformed from the one that witnessed its birth. The Western Alliance it was created to strengthen faces new challenges from within and without. The closed-door diplomacy it epitomizes struggles for legitimacy in an age that demands transparency. The very concept of elite consensus it embodies encounters resistance in increasingly polarized societies. What endures is the fundamental question Bilderberg raises. In a world of competing national interests, who speaks for the international system itself? In the absence of formal global governance, what role should informal networks play? How are we to understand power that operates beyond public view, yet shapes the environments in which public decisions are made? As you drift toward sleep, consider the chambers where the powerful gather beyond our sight, the conversations that shape our world yet remain unheard by most. Consider the delicate balance between necessary discretion and democratic accountability, between the efficiency of private dialogue and the legitimacy of public deliberation. For in the story of Bilderberg lies a larger tale about how our world is governed not just through the visible institutions of states and international organizations, but through the invisible networks that connect those who hold the levers of power across borders and domains. Perhaps, as consciousness fades into dreams, you might imagine yourself at that table, among the select few whose whispers may become tomorrow's headlines. What would you say? What wisdom would you offer? What questions would you ask of those who shape our collective destiny? So sleep well, dear dreamer, beneath the canopy of stars that shine upon both the powerful and powerless alike, as the world turns and history unfolds in both the light and shadows. The year was 1119, when Jerusalem lay under the banner of the Latin Kingdom, a fragile conquest of the First Crusade. In those days, pilgrims journeyed across treacherous lands, their faith fervent but their bodies vulnerable to bandits who showed no mercy on the sacred roads to the Holy City. As the shadows grew longer across the Outremer territories, 9 knights swore an oath before the Patriarch of Jerusalem, pledging to protect these travelers from harm. Their leader, a French nobleman named Hugh de Payens, could not have known that this humble beginning would give rise to one of history's most enigmatic brotherhoods, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, better known to whispers of history as the Knights Templar. These warriors took residence on the Temple Mount, believed to be built upon the ruins of Solomon's temple itself. They lived in poverty, owned no individual property, and dedicated themselves wholly to their mission of protection. For nearly a decade, they operated in obscurity, their numbers unchanged, their purpose singular. But fate, as it often does, had grander designs for this modest brotherhood. The Council of Troyes in 1129 marked their transformation from obscure guardians to an officially sanctioned military order of the Catholic Church. Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential churchmen of his age, penned their Latin rule, a code of conduct governing every aspect of their lives. With papal recognition came privileges unprecedented, exemption from taxes, freedom from local laws, answerable only to the Pope himself. The humble protectors had become something far more potent, a transnational power whose reach would soon extend across Christendom. Their distinctive white mantles emblazoned with a red cross became a symbol recognized throughout Europe and the Levant, a sigil of piety, martial prowess, and growing influence. Kings and nobles, inspired by their holy mission, bestowed upon them vast estates, fortresses, and wealth beyond measure. What had begun with 9 knights swelled into thousands of brothers in arms, supported by numerous sergeants, chaplains, and servants, all bound by sacred vows. As their numbers grew, so too did their responsibilities. No longer mere protectors of pilgrims, the Templars evolved into the shock troops of Christendom, their tactical discipline legendary on the battlefields of Outremer. At Montgisard in 1177, they helped deliver a stunning victory against Saladin's forces, despite being vastly outnumbered. Their battle cry, "Non nobis, Domine, non nobis, sed nomini tuo da gloriam," not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name give glory, echoed across blood-soaked sands as they fought with the certainty of men who believed both victory and death led equally to divine reward. Yet perhaps their most enduring innovation came not from the sword but from the quill. As pilgrims needed safe passage for their bodies, they also required safe passage for their wealth. The Templars created one of the first banking systems, allowing travelers to deposit funds in one preceptory and withdraw at another, carrying only a simple parchment letter instead of tempting coins. Their network stretched across Europe to the Holy Land, their financial acumen nearly as formidable as their martial skill. Kings, nobles, and merchants entrusted their treasures to Templar strongholds, whose stone walls and disciplined guardians offered security unmatched in the medieval world. But the tide of history is relentless, and no power, however great, can withstand its inexorable flow forever. The Crusader states began to crumble under Muslim reconquest. Acre, the last Christian stronghold in the Holy Land, fell in 1291. The Templars, whose very purpose was bound to these sacred territories, found themselves adrift, wealthy, powerful, but without their founding mission. They retreated to Cyprus and their European commanderies, their future uncertain in a world that no longer required their original vow. It was in this vulnerable moment of transition that tragedy found them. King Philip IV of France, his coffers empty from years of warfare, cast covetous eyes upon the Templar treasury. On Friday, October 13, 1307, a date forever after linked with misfortune, the king's men moved simultaneously across France. Templar knights were dragged from their beds at dawn, arrested on charges so shocking they seemed beyond belief: heresy, apostasy, idol worship, and unnatural acts. Under torture's cruel ministrations, many confessed to spitting on the cross, denying Christ, and worshipping a mysterious head called Baphomet. Jacques de Molay, the order's Grand Master, himself admitted guilt before later recanting, declaring that only pain had drawn such falsehoods from his lips. Pope Clement V, himself under Philip's influence while residing in Avignon, initially resisted the king's pressure but ultimately acquiesced. In 1312, at the Council of Vienne, he issued the papal bull Vox in Excelso, officially dissolving the Knights Templar after nearly 2 centuries of service to Christendom. The final act of this tragedy unfolded on a small island in the Seine on March 18, 1314. Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny, preceptor of Normandy, were led to a pyre. As flames began to lick at their aged bodies, de Molay issued what some would call a curse that both King Philip and Pope Clement would join him before God's throne within the year. Whether by coincidence or something more mysterious, both men did indeed die within months of the Grand Master's execution. The Templars were no more, their vast wealth largely absorbed by their rivals, the Knights Hospitaller, or seized by opportunistic monarchs. Their preceptories fell silent, their distinctive white mantles vanished from the roads of Europe. But unlike most fallen orders, their end birthed something perhaps more enduring than their actual existence: legend. In the centuries that followed, the Knights Templar transcended historical footnote to become the centerpiece of countless myths, conspiracy theories, and esoteric traditions. Some whispered they had discovered profound secrets beneath Solomon's temple, the Ark of the Covenant perhaps, or knowledge passed down from ancient Egypt. Others claimed they were secret protectors of the bloodline of Christ and Mary Magdalene. Freemasonry embraced aspects of Templar symbolism and ritual, keeping alive a connection, however tenuous, to these warrior monks. From the mists of medievalism to the electric glow of modern screens, the Templars remain with us, in novels, films, video games, and the quiet speculation of those drawn to history's unresolved mysteries. Their red cross still symbolizes something profound in our collective imagination: the union of spiritual devotion and worldly power, of monastic discipline and battlefield courage, of spectacular rise and catastrophic fall. As you drift towards sleep, dear dreamer, consider how these men who lived nearly a millennium ago still whisper through time's long corridor. Their story reminds us how swiftly fortune's wheel turns, how yesterday's protectors become tomorrow's accused, how power accumulated over generations can vanish in a single dawn. Perhaps in some corner of Portugal or Scotland, as some legends suggest, Templars who escaped Philip's grasp continued their secret work. Or perhaps their greatest legacy lies not in hidden treasures, but in the questions they leave us about faith, power, and the nature of truth itself. What secrets, if any, did they take to their graves? What wisdom might have been lost in those final flames along the Seine? As consciousness gently recedes like an ebbing tide, ponder how thin the line between history and myth can be, how 9 humble knights became an army, became a legend, became an eternal symbol of mystery. So sleep well, dear dreamer, as the red cross of the Templars fades into the darkness of your room and the greater darkness of time, leaving only questions dancing at the edge of dreams. Nestled among the mist-shrouded valleys and towering peaks of the Elburz Mountains in northern Persia, a shadow society took form in the late 11th century, one whose name would eventually enter countless languages as a term for political murder. They called themselves the Nizari Ismailis, devotees of a schismatic branch of Shia Islam, but history would remember them by another name, whispered in fear across medieval courts from Damascus to Paris, the Hashashin, or, as the Crusaders pronounced it, the Assassins. Their grandmaster, a brilliant scholar named Hassan-i Sabah, transformed a persecuted religious minority into one of history's most feared covert organizations through an extraordinary blend of unwavering faith, psychological manipulation, and calculated violence. The story begins in 1090, when Hassan-i Sabah, after years of careful planning, captured the remote mountain fortress of Alamut, the Eagle's Nest, through cunning rather than bloodshed. This precipitous stronghold, seemingly suspended between heaven and earth, became the center of a growing network of mountain citadels that defied the overwhelming might of the Seljuk Empire. From these lofty sanctuaries, Hassan wove an intricate web of power that would challenge caliphs and crusaders alike for nearly 2 centuries, despite never commanding an army that could meet its enemies on an open battlefield. Within the secluded gardens of Alamut, legends tell that Hassan created a paradise filled with beautiful fountains, fragrant flowers, delectable foods, and enchanting houris, earthly reflections of the paradise promised in Islamic scripture. Young devotees would be drugged, it was said, and awakened within these gardens, convinced they had been granted a glimpse of the eternal reward that awaited those who faithfully served the order. While modern historians debate the truth of this garden of earthly delights, what remains undisputed is the psychological mastery Hassan wielded over his followers, whom he molded into the most disciplined and feared operatives of their age. The Nizari power grew not through military conquest, but through perfectly executed assassinations that struck with surgical precision at the heart of enemy leadership. Their approach was revolutionary. Rather than risking thousands in open warfare, they deployed individual fidain, those who sacrificed themselves, to eliminate key figures of the Seljuk Empire and other adversaries. These agents trained relentlessly in languages, disguise, and the patient art of gaining trust, often spending months or years infiltrating the inner circles of their targets. Their preferred weapon was the dagger, intimate, silent, and requiring absolute commitment, as escape after the act was rarely possible or even expected. Unlike common murderers who struck from shadows, the assassins made their presence deliberately known. They performed their missions in broad daylight, often in very public spaces, marketplaces, mosques, and palaces, ensuring witnesses would spread tales of their fearsome dedication. The Fidayan embraced death with tranquil certainty, making no attempt to escape after fulfilling their mission, instead awaiting capture with serene smiles that unnerved their executioners. This psychological warfare proved devastatingly effective. The mere rumor of assassin presence could paralyze political action and force powerful rulers to negotiate with this small mountain sect. Hassan-i Sabah himself lived an ascetic life of striking contradictions. Though master of a sect renowned for violence, he rarely left his austere chambers during his 35-year rule at Alamut, dedicating himself to prayer, study, and strategic direction. His famous dictum, "Nothing is true, everything is permitted," is likely apocryphal, yet captures something essential about the order's willingness to transcend conventional moral boundaries in service to their cause. He enforced strict religious observance among his followers while simultaneously creating a revolutionary doctrine that challenged the religious authorities of his day. When his own sons violated his community's strict code, he ordered their execution, demonstrating that no one, not even his flesh and blood, stood above the order's principles. The assassin's influence reached its zenith under the leadership of Hassan's successor, Buzurg Umid, and later under the legendary Rashid ad-Din Sinan, known to history as the Old Man of the Mountain. It was during this golden age that the order's reputation spread westward, carried by Crusader knights returning to Europe with half-understood tales of an invincible mountain sect whose members courted death with lovers' enthusiasm. Sinan played these fears masterfully, once allegedly sending a message to the great Saladin by having a dagger planted in the Sultan's tent while he slept, alongside a note that could have just as easily been delivered on a blade between his ribs. Yet, as with all secret societies that burn brightly in history's imagination, the assassin's fall would come with apocalyptic finality. As the 13th century unfolded, a threat emerged from the steppes of Mongolia that would redraw the map of Asia with horrifying speed. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, turned his attention to the elimination of troublesome powers in Persia as a prelude to his planned conquest of Baghdad. The Mongol armies, pragmatic, methodical, and utterly ruthless, were unmoved by the assassin's mystique and unimpressed by the threat of targeted killings against leaders who could be readily replaced. In 1256, the seemingly impregnable fortress of Alamut fell after a brief siege. The Mongols, renowned for their siegecraft and determination, succeeded where 2 centuries of enemies had failed. The legendary library of Alamut, containing incalculable knowledge collected by Hassan and his successors, was put to flame before its secrets could be fully explored by posterity. The mountain network that had defied empires for almost 200 years crumbled in mere months under the Mongol onslaught, with most of the Nizari strongholds surrendering rather than facing inevitable destruction. The Syrian branch of the assassins lingered for a few more decades, eventually submitting to Mamluk authority and fading into obscurity, their fearsome reputation gradually transforming into legend. Today, the spiritual descendants of the Nizari Ismailis continue as a peaceful religious community led by the Aga Khan, bearing little resemblance to their storied ancestors except in matters of devotion. The dreaded Hashashin, once the nightmare of sultans and crusader lords alike, dissolved into the mists of history, leaving behind little but their infamous name and half-remembered tales. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy of Hassan-i Sabbah's vision lies in how thoroughly his creation captured the medieval imagination. Marco Polo's somewhat fanciful account of the assassins enthralled European readers, while Crusader chronicles spread embellished stories of immortal killers driven by hashish-induced visions. The truth, as often happens, was both more mundane and more remarkable, a marginalized religious sect that transformed strategic violence into an art form and challenged vast empires through unwavering conviction and psychological warfare rather than military might. As sleep begins to envelop your consciousness, consider how the assassins represent one of history's great paradoxes. A society remembered primarily for killing, yet one that chose targeted violence precisely to minimize bloodshed in an age of indiscriminate slaughter. A religious community seeking spiritual purity through means many would consider profoundly impure. Their story asks us how far conviction might carry us, and at what point the means undermines the very ends we seek. From their mountain fortresses, now crumbled to dust, they remind us how even the most feared powers eventually succumb to time's relentless advance. As your thoughts grow distant and dreams' veil draws closer, imagine Hassan-i Sabbah in his austere chamber at Alamut's summit, gazing out over misty valleys toward distant horizons, contemplating the ephemeral nature of all earthly power, even his own. His order's fearsome reputation would outlive their actual influence by centuries, transforming from historical reality to mythic archetype, their very name becoming synonymous with their method. So sleep well, dear dreamer, as shadows of forgotten mountain fortresses dissolve into the greater mystery of night, leaving only questions about faith, power, and sacrifice floating in the darkness beyond consciousness. Ancient India, in the fading light of the 3rd century BCE, witnessed the rise of an emperor whose blood-soaked conquests would transform him into a seeker of peace. The Kalinga War of 261 BCE left 100,000 dead and countless more wounded or displaced, their suffering etched into the consciousness of their conqueror. Standing amid the carnage of his victory, Emperor Ashoka Maurya, grandson of Chandragupta, unifier of the Indian subcontinent, experienced a profound spiritual awakening that would alter not only his reign, but potentially the flow of human knowledge for millennia to come. Legend speaks of a decision made in the aftermath of this revelation, a secret brotherhood established to both protect and contain dangerous knowledge. 9 scholars who would form one of history's most enigmatic and enduring secret societies, the 9 Unknown Men. Each of these 9 sages, personally selected by the emperor from among the greatest minds of the Mauryan Empire, was entrusted with a specific book of knowledge so powerful that Ashoka believed its unregulated dissemination would bring ruin rather than enlightenment to humanity. The first book contained secrets of propaganda and psychological warfare, the subtle art of shaping beliefs and bending nations, without drawing a single sword. The second preserved the mysteries of physiology, including methods to kill a person by merely touching them, the knowledge of pressure points, and the body's hidden vulnerabilities. The third explored microbiology and biotechnology, sciences not to be rediscovered by Western minds for nearly 2 millennia. The fourth tome cataloged alchemy and transmutation of metals, while the fifth revealed the secrets of communication, both terrestrial and cosmic, perhaps even with beings beyond our world. The sixth book delved into the science of gravity and flight, allegedly containing principles that would not resurface until the modern age. The seventh explored cosmogony and the nature of the universe itself. The eighth decoded the laws of light and time, while the ninth and perhaps most dangerous volume contained the primal secrets of creation and destruction, technologies of war so advanced that they could lay waste to entire civilizations. As Emperor Ashoka embraced Buddhism and the principle of ahimsa, non-violence toward all living beings, he grew increasingly convinced that humanity was not prepared for such knowledge. The 9 were charged with preserving these secrets, while releasing carefully measured fragments of wisdom when humankind demonstrated sufficient moral evolution to wield them responsibly. Through centuries of invasion, cultural upheaval, and imperial collapse, this brotherhood purportedly continued its silent guardianship, each member selecting and training their successor before death, maintaining an unbroken chain of custodians across 23 centuries. Unlike more flamboyant secret societies, the 9 Unknown Men left no monuments, no emblems, and no public declarations of their existence. Their influence, if the legends hold truth, manifested instead through subtle interventions in human affairs. When civilizations approached technological thresholds for which they lacked ethical frameworks, the 9 might introduce disruptive ideas or quietly sabotage dangerous advancements. Conversely, societies displaying moral sophistication might find themselves blessed with sudden, seemingly intuitive scientific breakthroughs, gifts from anonymous benefactors, whose origins could never be traced. Western awareness of this ancient brotherhood emerged primarily through the writings of Louis Jacoliot, the 19th-century French colonial judge in Pondicherry, whose explorations of Indian mysticism introduced the Nine to European consciousness. Later, Talbot Mundy's 1923 novel, The Nine Unknown, further popularized the concept, presenting the society as centuries-old guardians working to counter societal darkness. Despite, or perhaps because of the absence of definitive proof, the Nine Unknown Men gradually ascended from obscure legend to a position of prominence in esoteric traditions and speculative history. Some researchers suggest subtle fingerprints of the Nine's influence throughout documented history. The sudden mathematical sophistication of the Gupta Empire, the unaccounted technological advancements of ancient Indian metallurgy, which produced rust-resistant iron pillars that baffle modern scientists, and certain inexplicable gaps in historical records, where knowledge seems to have appeared almost spontaneously in disparate cultures, all have been attributed to their hidden hand. Pope Sylvester II, whose unexpected scientific knowledge in the 10th century seemed centuries ahead of European understanding, was rumored to have encountered a member of the Nine during his studies in Spain. The legends reached their cryptic crescendo in the 20th century, when speculation emerged that scientists and humanitarians, including Einstein, Tesla, and even Gandhi, might have been connected to this ancient lineage of knowledge keepers. The peculiar advancement of theoretical physics in the early 1900s, yielding insights that seemed to leap beyond the natural progression of human understanding, fueled whispers that perhaps the Nine had deemed humanity ready for the next fragment of cosmic wisdom. Yet for every revelation apparently granted, another branch of knowledge, particularly those concerning advanced weaponry, seemed to encounter mysterious delays or unexpected complications. But the story of the Nine Unknown Men transcends mere historical curiosity, touching something profound in our collective imagination, the eternal tension between knowledge and responsibility, between technological advancement and ethical maturity. In an age when scientific progress regularly outpaces moral consideration, when information spreads instantaneously without regard for consequence, the concept of wise guardians moderating the flow of dangerous knowledge resonates with peculiar relevance. Perhaps this explains why the legend has endured, not because evidence confirms their existence, but because their theoretical presence answers a deep human yearning for equilibrium between power and wisdom. Skeptics rightfully note the conspicuous absence of archaeological or textual evidence directly confirming the Brotherhood's existence. No authenticated manuscript from the Nine has ever surfaced in academic circles. No incontrovertible proof of their interventions has been documented by mainstream historians. The vast gaps in the historical record, particularly regarding ancient Indian history following the fall of the Mauryan Empire, provide fertile ground for such legends to take root while simultaneously ensuring they remain resistant to definitive disproof. The Nine Unknown Men thus inhabit that tantalizing twilight realm between historical possibility and mythological archetype. Whether literal truth or allegorical wisdom, the legend raises questions that transcend its historical veracity. If such guardians of knowledge existed, would their millennial concealment of certain technologies represent humanity's salvation or its deprivation? Does wisdom justify paternalism? Is there knowledge for which humanity remains fundamentally unprepared? The enduring fascination with the Nine Unknown Men may reflect not just our love of mystery, but our collective ambivalence about the unfettered pursuit of knowledge, the subtle recognition that not all discoveries bring enlightenment. As consciousness begins to soften at the edges and sleep approaches, consider how this ancient tale speaks directly to our modern condition. We live in an era when scientific capabilities advance exponentially, while ethical frameworks struggle to keep pace. When information flows freely, yet wisdom remains as rare and precious as ever. Perhaps in the space between wakefulness and dreams, we might appreciate the profound tension embodied in this legend, between our endless hunger to know and our ambivalence about the responsibilities such knowledge entails. As your thoughts grow distant and sleep draws near, imagine 9 silent scholars moving through the centuries, each carrying ancient wisdom in 9 books that have never known dust or decay. Envision their patient vigil across millennia, watching civilizations rise and fall like waves upon the shore, measuring humanity's ethical evolution against the dangerous brilliance of forbidden knowledge. Whether they exist beyond the realm of legend matters less than what they represent: the hope that somewhere, somehow, wisdom guides the hand that wields the power of discovery. So sleep well, dear dreamer, as the mysteries of the 9 unknown men dissolve into the greater mystery of night, leaving only questions about knowledge, responsibility, and our collective future floating in the darkness beyond consciousness.